Hi, my name is Victoria, and I'm 30 years old. I spent years working 70-hour weeks, sacrificing everything just to buy my dream car, the 1969 Corvette Stingray. It wasn't just a car to me. It was a symbol of my independence, my hard work, and my connection to my late grandfather. But when I returned home from a business trip, I found it gone, sold without my permission. And to my shock, my sister was the one driving it. What happened next turned my world upside down and taught me that family loyalty isn't always what it seems. If you've ever had someone you love betray your trust, if you've ever felt like your hard-earned success was taken from you without a second thought, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned. This story is about reclaiming what's rightfully yours, facing the truth, and the fierce power of standing up for yourself. I was raised in a family that didn't always understand my passions, but that never stopped me from pursuing them. Growing up, I was always the one to dive into things that made me feel alive, whether it was working on cars, getting my hands dirty, or challenging the norms of what a woman could do. My love for classic cars wasn't something that came from watching movies or reading magazines. It came from the early years spent with my grandfather, the one person who truly understood me. I was the oldest of 2 children, and growing up there was a constant comparison between me and my younger sister, Emily. Emily was everything my parents expected, gentle, sweet, and well, typical. She loved ballet, playing with dolls, and all the things that made her a proper girl in their eyes. I was the opposite. Loud, determined, and curious about everything mechanical. Instead of playing with Barbies or attending dance classes, I spent my Saturday mornings in my grandfather's dusty old garage, watching as he restored vintage cars. It was the best part of my week, and it sparked a fire in me that would never go out. My grandfather, who everyone called Grandpa Joe, was a larger-than-life figure in my world. His love for cars wasn't just about the machines. They were stories, memories, and pieces of history to him. I remember his weathered hands as they carefully wiped down the chrome of his prized 1969 Corvette Stingray, its shiny red paint gleaming under the dim light of the garage. It wasn't just a car. It was a legacy. It was Grandpa's pride and joy, and every time I'd ask him about it, he'd tell me that cars had personalities, that they weren't just machines but companions. He'd pat the Corvette's hood and say, "This beauty has a soul." I always dreamed that one day I'd own one just like it. And while I was growing up, I kept that dream alive, no matter what anyone else thought. My parents, especially, never understood my obsession with cars. They'd shake their heads and say things like, "Why can't you be more like Emily?" My dad would joke about how I was more like one of the boys, and my mom would sigh when I came home from the garage with grease stains on my clothes. Emily, on the other hand, was always praised for her more feminine interests. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me, they just couldn't understand why I wasn't interested in the things they thought I should be. When it came to my sister Emily, it was always the same. She was given everything. The latest designer clothes, trips to fancy resorts, and the attention that came with being the perfect child. I remember when I asked for auto shop classes when I was 12, my mom scoffed, saying, "We just can't afford those kinds of things this year." But when Emily wanted a grand 16th birthday party, it was immediately arranged, no questions asked. It felt like no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, I would always be overshadowed by her. As I got older, I learned to tune out the comparisons and the favoritism. I poured my energy into my studies, working odd jobs and saving every penny I could. By the time I graduated high school, I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted that Corvette. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined. I was willing to sacrifice everything, and that's exactly what I did. I attended a prestigious college, majoring in finance. And while my classmates partied and spent money on luxuries, I lived frugally. I shared an apartment with roommates and took the bus to save money. I worked 2 part-time jobs, barely sleeping, just so I could save up for that car. I knew it would take years, but I was patient. Every paycheck, every dollar went into a savings account that was dedicated to my dream car. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. It wasn't something that seemed worth explaining to my parents. They never took me seriously when I talked about my goals, so I kept them to myself. They assumed I was just another college kid figuring out what to do with my life. But for me, the goal was clear. That Corvette was the finish line. The thought of it pushed me through the long nights of studying and the grueling work days. Finally, after 5 years of hard work, I was ready. I had saved enough. I scoured online forums, auction sites, and car shows, searching for the perfect one. And then one day I found it. A 1969 Corvette Stingray Rally Red, the same model Grandpa Joe had owned. It was a dream come true. The price was steep, $85,000, but it was everything I had worked for. Every cent in my savings account was devoted to this car. The day I drove that car home was one of the most emotional days of my life. I'll never forget the feeling of sitting behind the wheel, the engine purring beneath me as I cruised down the highway. It felt like Grandpa Joe was right there beside me, smiling down at me, telling me that I had done it. "We did it, Grandpa," I whispered, my eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just about buying a car. It was about proving to myself that I could accomplish anything if I worked hard enough. It was a testament to the sacrifices I had made and the independence I had built for myself. But little did I know, my family's idea of helping me was about to tear it all down. When I left for a business trip to Tokyo, I thought my car would be safe in my parents' garage. I was wrong. The very people who should have respected my hard work and sacrifice were the ones who betrayed me. I had been planning my business trip to Tokyo for months. It was a huge opportunity for my career, leading a presentation to a potential client worth millions. The excitement was palpable, but so was the dread of leaving my beloved Corvette behind for 3 weeks. I was nervous about the safety of the car, especially after hearing about some recent break-ins in my neighborhood. The thought of it sitting alone in my garage made me uneasy, so I decided to leave it in the one place I thought would be secure, my parents' house in Glenview. I called my dad the day before my flight to ask if he would mind storing it in their garage while I was gone. He assured me it would be safe, and for the first time, I felt a sense of relief. I didn't worry about it again until the plane touched down in Tokyo. My mind raced with the excitement of the presentation and the thrill of being in a foreign city. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I kept wondering if my car was being treated with the respect it deserved. My parents had always been supportive, but I knew their understanding of my attachment to the Corvette was limited. They didn't see it as anything more than a car, just a possession. But for me, it was much more. It was a reminder of my grandfather's lessons, my hard work, and everything I had achieved on my own. I had entrusted my parents to care for it, and that's where I made my first mistake. The trip was a whirlwind. I had meetings, conference calls, and countless hours spent strategizing for the business. Every day felt like it was filled with new challenges, and by the time I was ready to head home, I could barely keep my eyes open. Tokyo had been everything I hoped it would be and more, but all I could think about was getting back to my car and sharing the news of my success with my family. The flight back felt long, but my anticipation kept me going. I was so excited to finally get home, take my car out for a drive along Lake Michigan and tell my boyfriend James about the promotion I had secured. He'd always been supportive of my dreams and understood just how much that Corvette meant to me. I couldn't wait to show him. As I landed at O'Hare, my phone buzzed with messages from James. Just pulled up to your parents' place. Everything okay with the car?" It read. His message set off a small alarm in my mind. Why was he at my parents' house? I assumed he was just helping out, maybe checking on the car for me since I was on a long trip. But something felt off. I pushed the feeling aside and grabbed a cab home. As we turned onto my parents' street, my heart sank. I saw the garage door open, and in place of the familiar red Corvette, I saw my dad's sedan and my mom's SUV. There was no sign of my car. My mind raced with confusion. Maybe they moved it, I thought. Maybe they decided to clean it up and parked it outside for a moment. But as the cab pulled up to the curb and I stepped out, my stomach twisted with unease. I entered the house, hoping to find a simple explanation. But when I saw my mom standing in the hallway, her face held a strange expression, one I couldn't quite place. "Mom, where's my car?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my mind was already racing with possibilities. Mom hesitated. "Oh, it's not here," she said, her voice faltering as she avoided my gaze. My chest tightened as panic began to set in. "What do you mean it's not here?" I pressed, trying to keep my composure. "Where is it?" Before she could answer, my dad walked into the room, his expression stiff. "Your mom and we thought it would be a good idea to sell it," he said, clearly uncomfortable. I blinked in disbelief. "Sell it? My car? My dream car?" "What do you mean, sell it?" I asked, my voice cracking with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. "You sold it?" My mind raced and I felt the room spinning. This couldn't be real. They couldn't have possibly sold my car. "Well, your sister needed it," my mom said, avoiding eye contact. She was having a tough time with work, and the vacation she was planning was really important to her. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her. My mother's words hit me like a slap in the face. My sister needed it? Emily? The one who always had everything handed to her without lifting a finger? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind reeled as I tried to piece together the explanation. "You sold my car to fund her vacation?" I asked, my voice rising. "My car? That I worked my entire life for? For her?" "Listen, it was a big decision," my dad started, looking guilty, "but she needed the money. We couldn't stand to see her miss out on this opportunity. She's been working hard, too, and—" "No," I interrupted. "Number, you don't just sell someone's property like that. My property. I trusted you to take care of it. It was my car, and you had no right to sell it." My voice shook with frustration and hurt as I stared at my parents, who looked more and more uncomfortable by the second. Mom's eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting. Emily needed this, and honestly, you can always buy another car. You make good money, Victoria. You'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was dismissing my feelings, my hard work, and my entire connection to that car as if it meant nothing. It wasn't just a car to me. It was the symbol of everything I had sacrificed, every ounce of energy and effort I had poured into my career. It was my victory. I stormed out of the room, my heart racing with a mixture of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. I couldn't understand why my parents, my own parents, could do this to me. And what made it worse was that they had sold it to my sister, Emily. Emily, who didn't care about the value of my hard work. Emily, who always got what she wanted without ever lifting a finger. My parents had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. My mind was still spinning as I stormed out of the house, my thoughts a chaotic whirl of disbelief. My parents had just told me they sold my dream car. My hard-earned possession, the symbol of my independence and everything I had worked for, was gone. And they did it to help my sister, Emily, take a luxurious vacation. A vacation she didn't deserve. The anger inside me was boiling over, but deep down there was something else. A strange feeling that kept gnawing at me, telling me that things weren't quite as they seemed. As I drove to James' apartment, I tried to calm myself down, but my hands were trembling on the wheel. How could they do this? How could they just take something so valuable to me and give it away without even consulting me? I needed answers, and I wasn't about to let them get away with this betrayal. When I arrived at James' place, he was waiting for me. His usual calm demeanor, a welcome contrast to the storm raging inside me. He could see it in my eyes before I even said a word. I didn't need to explain. He already knew something was wrong. "Talk to me," he said, guiding me inside. As I recounted the conversation with my parents, his face grew more and more concerned. But there was something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before, something that made me stop mid-sentence. "Wait," he said, his voice calm yet intense. "What if it's not your car they sold?" I stared at him, confusion taking over. "What are you talking about? Of course, it's my car. They sold it. They admitted it." James shook his head slowly. "I know, but think about it. You swapped your real car with mine before you left, remember? The one you were worried about getting stolen?" A chill ran down my spine as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. My heart skipped a beat. James was right. When I left for Tokyo, I had swapped my 1969 Corvette Stingray for his replica, knowing it was safer that way. It was a precautionary measure, one I hadn't thought about much at the time, but now it was the key to unraveling everything. I sat down on the couch, my hands clutching the edge as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The car my parents sold wasn't my car. It was James's replica, the one that looked nearly identical to mine but was worth far less. The thought of it made my stomach turn. They had sold his car without even realizing it. "That's why they didn't realize the difference," James said, confirming my suspicions. "They thought it was yours because it looked exactly the same. But mine isn't the real deal. It's just a replica." I took a deep breath, trying to process this new revelation. On one hand, I felt a strange sense of relief. They hadn't sold my real car. But on the other hand, the betrayal still stung, and it hurt even more that they had taken something from James without his permission. "Do you think they knew?" I asked, my voice shaky. "Did they realize it wasn't my car when they sold it?" James's eyes narrowed. "I don't know, but they've committed a crime here, whether they realized it or not. They sold someone else's property without permission. That's theft, plain and simple." The anger inside me reignited, this time aimed at my parents and their carelessness. They had sold James's car, and in the process, they had broken the law. And yet, they still had the audacity to justify their actions to me. I couldn't just let this slide. There were legal implications, and I wasn't going to sit back and let them off the hook without facing the consequences. "I need to call them," I said, standing up abruptly. "I need to get to the bottom of this. They can't just get away with it." But James held up his hand, stopping me. "Before you call them, we need to think this through. We can't just go in all guns blazing. There are legal consequences here, and if we press charges, your family could be in serious trouble." I paused, considering his words. The last thing I wanted was for my parents to go to jail, but they couldn't be allowed to just get away with breaking the law either. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about respect. Respect for boundaries, for property, and for each other. "I know," I said quietly, sitting back down. I feel so betrayed. How could they do this to me? How could they think it was okay to sell something that wasn't theirs? James placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I know, but we need to handle this carefully. We can resolve this without destroying your family. Let's figure out how to make it right without tearing everything apart." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The flood of emotions was overwhelming, but I knew James was right. This wasn't just about getting revenge or making my parents suffer. It was about holding them accountable and finding a solution that would allow us to move forward. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air as I sat with James, trying to figure out how to handle what had just unfolded. My parents had sold James's car, my car's replica, without his permission. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was theft, a crime in the eyes of the law. And even though I knew they hadn't meant to cause harm, the reality was inescapable. What they had done was illegal. The thought of pursuing legal action against my own parents sent a cold shiver through my body, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the gravity of what had happened. "Victoria," James said, breaking my thoughts, "we need to think this through carefully. This is not something you can just sweep under the rug. It's a serious crime, and there are consequences. They could face jail time if we press charges." His words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled in my chest. I wanted to believe that my parents didn't fully understand the severity of their actions, that they didn't realize they were committing a crime. But the truth was, they had been reckless. They had sold a car that didn't belong to them, and now we were left to deal with the aftermath. "I can't just let them off the hook," I said, my voice quiet but firm. What they did wasn't just thoughtless, it was criminal. They sold something that wasn't theirs, without asking for permission. I can't just pretend like nothing happened. They need to be held accountable. James nodded, his expression serious. "I agree, but the question is, how do you want to handle it? Do you want to press charges? Or do you want to find a way to resolve this without dragging them through the legal system?" The choice was mine, and it felt like a heavy burden. I had never imagined I would be in this position, but here I was, faced with the consequences of my family's actions and the moral dilemma of how to proceed. If I pressed charges, it could destroy my relationship with my parents forever. But if I didn't, they might never understand the gravity of what they had done, and I could never truly forgive them for betraying my trust. I took a deep breath and thought about it. The situation was complicated. I didn't want my parents to go to jail. They were good people, and I knew they didn't intend for any harm to come from their actions. But the reality was that they had crossed a line. My trust, my boundaries, and even the law. Let's try to resolve this outside of the courts first, I said finally, making a decision. I don't want to destroy my family, but they need to understand the seriousness of what they've done. We need to fix this, but we can't just let them walk away without consequences. James agreed. We can try to work it out with them. We can make them pay back the money and return the car. But you'll need to be clear with them that this can't happen again. They need to understand that they can't just take your property or anyone else's without permission. I felt a small sense of relief wash over me. This wouldn't be easy, but it was the best option I had. I didn't want to tear my family apart, but I needed to make it clear that there were boundaries that had to be respected. And if they wanted to maintain a relationship with me, they had to face the consequences of their actions. The next morning, I called my parents. My heart was pounding as I dialed their number, knowing that the conversation I was about to have would determine the course of our relationship. I had no idea how they would react, whether they would accept responsibility or try to justify their actions further. When my mother answered the phone, I could hear the hesitation in her voice. She knew something was wrong. "Victoria," she said, her tone strained, "is everything okay? We've been trying to reach you." "I need to talk to both of you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know what you did. You sold the car, the Corvette." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then my dad spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Victoria, we didn't mean to hurt you. We thought we were helping Emily. She was going through a tough time, and she really needed that vacation. We didn't think it would be such a big deal." "A big deal?" I said, my voice rising in frustration. "You sold my car, Dad. My car. You didn't think it would be a big deal." "We didn't know it was your car exactly," my mom chimed in, her voice defensive. "We thought it was the same one, but we didn't realize it was the real one. We just thought it was a replica." At that moment, I realized they still didn't fully grasp what they had done. They thought they were helping Emily, but in doing so, they had broken every rule of trust and respect. My car, James's replica, wasn't just a car to me. It was my legacy. It was everything I had worked for, and they had sold it without even consulting me. "Listen," I said, trying to keep calm. "I understand that you wanted to help Emily, but what you did was wrong. You sold someone else's property without permission, and that's theft. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but because you need to understand how serious this is." My father sighed. "I know, Victoria. I'm sorry. We didn't think it through. We just wanted to fix things for Emily." "You can't fix things for her by selling my property," I said firmly. "You need to make this right." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear my parents talking quietly to each other. They knew I was right. They knew they had crossed a line, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. The following days were filled with difficult conversations, tearful apologies, and a sense of deep discomfort that lingered in the air. My parents were finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had done, but while the apology was coming, I couldn't help but wonder if it was truly sincere or just a reaction to the fear of facing serious consequences. Either way, the damage was done, and there was no turning back. Now it was up to me to decide how to proceed. James and I spent the next few days figuring out our options. As much as I wanted to punish my parents for their actions, I couldn't bring myself to ruin our relationship over a car. The car, while precious to me, was not worth losing my family. I had to weigh the emotional fallout, the long-term consequences, and what I truly wanted for my future. My parents were still family, and despite the betrayal, I didn't want to see them suffer. One evening, I sat down with James to talk things through. "I've been thinking a lot about what to do next," I confessed. "I could press charges, but I don't want them to go to jail. They made a huge mistake, but I don't think they meant for it to go this far." James nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I get it. They're your parents, and you don't want to break that bond completely. But they also need to understand that actions have consequences. They can't just take things from people, even if they're family. You need to make it clear that what they did is unacceptable." I knew he was right. I had already made up my mind. I couldn't let them off the hook completely, but I also couldn't destroy them. There had to be another way, a way to hold them accountable without losing everything. The next day, I called my parents and asked them to come over. I could sense the tension in their voices as they agreed, and I knew this meeting would be difficult for all of us, but it was necessary. It was time to make them understand. When they arrived at my apartment, they looked as nervous as I felt. My mom was the first to speak, her voice trembling slightly. "Victoria, we are so sorry. We never meant for things to get this out of hand. We thought we were helping Emily, but we were wrong. We should have never sold your car." I could see the regret in her eyes, and for the first time, I believed that they truly understood the gravity of their actions. But as I looked at my father, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still some defensiveness lurking underneath his apology. He was sorry, but he wasn't ready to fully admit the fault of his actions. My father had always been proud, and this moment of vulnerability was difficult for him. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but you did," I said, my voice steady but firm. Selling my car was more than just a bad decision. It was a betrayal. And it wasn't just about the car. It was about respecting my hard work, my boundaries, and my feelings. "We were selfish," my dad muttered, his voice thick with shame. "We thought Emily needed that vacation, and we didn't consider what it would do to you. We were wrong, and I'm sorry." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the words, but still unsure if they truly understood the full extent of the consequences. "I appreciate the apology," I said, taking a deep breath. "But this can't happen again. I've worked my entire life to earn what I have, and you need to respect that. Family is important, but so are boundaries. I need to know that you'll respect that moving forward." Both my parents nodded solemnly, and my mom took a step forward. "We promise. We've learned our lesson, and we won't do anything like this again. We will make it right. We'll do whatever it takes." After a long and difficult conversation, we came to an agreement. My parents would pay back the full amount they received for selling the car, and they would make restitution for the emotional distress they had caused me. It wasn't just about the money. It was about making sure they understood the gravity of their actions and how deeply they had impacted my trust in them. James and I decided to help them through the process. While I didn't want to press charges, I wanted them to feel the weight of their mistake. The plan was simple. They would pay the $50,000 they had received for the car, plus an additional $5,000 for the inconvenience. They agreed to these terms, but I also made it clear that we needed a formal, notarized apology from them. They would sign a legal document acknowledging their mistake and promising never to overstep their boundaries again. The following week, the payment was made. The money was wired back to the buyer, and James's replica Corvette was returned, thankfully undamaged. The emotional toll had been heavy, but it seemed that both sides were ready to heal. My parents, despite their initial resistance, accepted the written apology requirement, knowing that this was the only way to truly begin repairing our relationship. That evening, as James and I sat together, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. It had been a difficult journey, filled with pain, betrayal, and hard lessons. But it had also been a journey of personal growth, of learning to stand up for myself and demand the respect I deserved. The car, which had once symbolized my struggles and sacrifices, now represented a different kind of victory, one of self-respect and the importance of setting boundaries. I realized that while the material things in life are important, they are nothing without the emotional connections we have with the people we love. I had fought for my car, yes, but in doing so, I had learned that the real prize was not just the car itself, but the understanding that I would never let anyone take advantage of me again, even if they were family. A month had passed since everything had come to a head. The betrayal, the confrontation, the apologies. A month since, I'd learned that standing up for myself didn't mean abandoning my family. It meant holding them accountable, making them understand that boundaries aren't just lines on paper, they are the very foundation of healthy relationships. It meant realizing that love isn't about letting people walk all over you, but about respecting each other's boundaries and working together to grow. As I sat at my parents' dining room table that evening, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had all been through. My father, who had always been the stoic provider, now looked softer somehow, more vulnerable, more open to the idea that maybe he hadn't been the perfect father he thought he was. My mother, who had always tried to smooth things over with kindness, was finally beginning to understand that being kind didn't mean always giving in. She had learned to respect me, not just as her daughter, but as an individual with her own dreams and goals. The tension that had once hung between us was gone, replaced by a tentative but real sense of healing. It was slow, but it was there. We were still family, and while things would never be the same, we were learning to navigate the new dynamic together. As dinner was served, I noticed small changes. Dad, for the first time in years, asked my permission before refilling my plate. Mom, who used to jump in and speak for me, now paused, allowing me the space to express myself. Even my sister, Emily, seemed different. Gone was the sense of entitlement that once defined her. She was more humble now, less eager to ask for favors, and more willing to take responsibility for her own actions. "How was work today?" Dad asked, breaking the silence, his voice softer than usual. "Busy," I replied, smiling. "But it's coming together. The Peterson account is demanding, but we're making progress." It was a small victory in a sea of larger changes, but I could see the pride in my father's eyes when he nodded. Emily, who had been quiet throughout dinner, suddenly spoke up. "I heard you got a promotion, Victoria. Vice president, right?" Her tone was genuine, not the competitive edge it used to have. It was the first time she had ever acknowledged my success without any hint of jealousy or dismissal. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Yes, Vice President of International Accounts, still getting used to the title. "That's really impressive," she said, her voice lacking the usual undertone of resentment. "I'm proud of you, Vic." It was a simple statement, but it meant the world to me. For the first time, Emily had acknowledged me, not just as her older sister, but as an equal. The weight of years of comparison and rivalry seemed to lift, if only for a moment. The conversation shifted to safer topics, family news, plans for the future, and upcoming trips. But as the evening wore on, I found myself reflecting on just how much had changed. The last few weeks had been full of uncomfortable truths, painful confrontations, and deep emotional wounds. But somehow, despite the difficulty, I felt lighter. I had fought for my boundaries, for my property, and for my own sense of worth. And in doing so, I had set the stage for a new kind of relationship with my family, one built on mutual respect, honesty, and understanding. As the night drew to a close and James and I said our goodbyes, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. The storm that had rocked my family was over, and in its wake there was a quiet calm. My parents had learned a difficult lesson, and I had too. While forgiveness wasn't easy, it was necessary. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing the betrayal. It meant accepting that people make mistakes and allowing space for growth and change. The journey wasn't over. There would still be bumps along the way, moments of tension and disagreements. But for the first time, I felt like we were moving in the right direction together. My relationship with my parents wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was better, healthier, and that was all I could ask for. I had reclaimed my power, not just in the form of a car, but in the form of my boundaries and my voice. I had learned that standing up for myself didn't mean cutting ties with those I loved. It meant standing firm in my convictions, demanding respect, and not allowing anyone, no matter how close, to take what was rightfully mine. As I drove home that night in my Corvette, I couldn't help but smile. The engine hummed beneath me, a steady reminder of everything I had overcome and everything that still lay ahead. The road ahead would never be entirely smooth. Life rarely is. But I knew that as long as I continued to stand my ground, as long as I continued to protect my boundaries and my heart, I would be okay. I hope my story has resonated with you in some way. We all face moments in life when we must stand up for ourselves, whether it's against family, friends, or circumstances. Setting boundaries isn't always easy, but it's necessary for our well-being. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where you had to fight for what you believe in, whether it was a possession, a relationship, or simply your own peace of mind, I want to hear your story. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love and risk your relationship for the sake of your own boundaries? How did you navigate that difficult decision? What did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your experiences in the comments below and let's continue the conversation together. If you found this story empowering or relatable, please hit the like button and subscribe for more personal stories that explore resilience, self-growth, and the power of standing up for yourself. And if you think this story might help someone you know, don't hesitate to share it. Sometimes just knowing that someone else has gone through something similar can make all the difference. Thanks for listening, and remember, your boundaries matter. Keep standing strong.